And then for a module declaration file, we simply need a modules node. And then, now what happens here is important. One of the toughest things to do can be to find your way around the configuration and learn which parts matter and which parts don't. For your modules node under modules, you need to match this string here to the folder structure that you're going to have inside your code pool. So based on the namespace and module name that I've chosen, first underscore module, I can just simply put the same thing here. And now the interesting thing that happens is when Magento sees this node, sorry. The interesting thing that happens here is that when Magento sees this node, first module, we're actually going to look in the code pool that we set here if our module is active. So here's our active flag. And here is our code pool. Remember, code pool is one of the few nodes that's camel-cased. So you have to have a capital P in there. And we're going to use the local code pool. Now, what happens is Magento, the configuration, when we're spinning up, we're going to look in app code local, first module. So a first folder that contains a module folder. And in there, look for an Etsy folder and find our config XML. That's the process that Magento goes through to load your module configuration. So that's why this is one of those nodes that really does matter what you name it. You have to remember this, else the system, if I put this, intended for this to point to some other location, my module configuration would never be loaded. So, let me make a little note here. So you might make the same note yourself. So that's app code. Actually, I'll change this to the code pool. And then first module. All right, lovely. So we've now done the most important part of getting our module activated in the system. So the next step, of course, then, is to create this folder structure under local. So we simply just need a first module, and we can go ahead and make our Etsy folder because that's what we'll need to. That's where we'll need to store our config XML file. So in here, we'll create another XML document called config, and it must be named config. And in here, we can start to do the things that we need to do. So right now, we have an active module in the system, or at least as soon as we refresh the configuration cache. So what we need to do first is specify an option in our config file. Well, if you recall, there was a default node. And in our default node, we can simply declare some XPath. So I will do just that. Some random XPath. All right, and here's a value. Oops. All right. So that's it. We've declared an option. This node will actually be copied under the stores node, so config stores, under each store's individual node. So if we have a store code of English or something, you would see, at the same level, you would see stores, and then an English node, and then under there we'd have some random XPath. That's effectively what's happening in the configuration in that big DOM structure. So how do we get access to this? Well, some interesting things that we need to do. So what we'll have to do is go, according to our instructions here, we need to go into the CMS index controller, which incidentally, based on your configuration, is going to be used to serve the home page. So what I'd like to do is open up AppCode Core, Mage, CMS, little c controllers, index controller. And here is our index action. We'll explain more about routing later on, or routing, I guess, depending on your corner of the world. But suffice it to say that internally, Magento is going to map a request for that doesn't have any sort of parameters after the URL, or after just the site, the domain name, to this location. So I can prove that to you, of course. Fire up my browser of choice. Oops. 127001, and then Mage. Uh-oh. Helps if I turn on my web server. So, is anyone having any problems finding it? So you see where I went, right? Was once again. Sorry, I moved through that a little bit quickly, but yeah. So Mage, CMS, controllers, index controller, and we're in the index action. So now I should have a home page. There we go, it's coming. So with our home page here, if I were to, so the basis of the root of my site is at, localhost mage training dev, my local host IP anyway. And if I go and just specify CMS/index/index, well, I get the same thing. Voila. All right, so that's CMS module, index controller, index action. Incidentally, of course, because index is always assumed, I can just go to CMS. If you want to configure this, it's in the admin under System Configuration and Web, I believe, for the default pages. Or somewhere thereabouts. All right, so how do we make something happen here? Well, quite simply, let's just check that we're in the right place. I'll do a die and hello world. And let's see. Now, if you have Enterprise Edition installed and you didn't see a difference, you're either in the wrong Magento instance or you have full page caching enabled. So if you're still seeing the home page and it rendered very quickly, you probably have full page caching enabled. Just go to System Configuration or System Cache Management and disable full page caching. All right, so now that we've proved that this works, we can start to do what the task has asked us to do. So I'm going to leave this die statement in. It's a bit of a silly example. I mean, this is certainly not a customization you would ever do. Really, the goal of doing this right here is to get you guys familiar with the idea that the CMS system is used to serve basically the page with no routing information as far as the system goes. All right, so we need to display our option. Well, we can do that any number of ways. So simplest way, perhaps, is Mage. Let's see. Mage get config. I'm sorry. Let's do mage get store config. And then we'll specify, we'll do the config in just a second. And we'll specify just the XPath that we have here. So sum random XPath. So sum slash random slash XPath. Oh, I have to save my file. So here we have a value. This is exactly what we intended to see. Again, this is not a very practical example, but just an important thing to show you how Magento accesses its configuration and how you can scope the configuration based on store. This is not a very typical usage. If I want to, for example, if I want to specify a different value based on a different store, well, I need to know, you may need to create new store views, or you may need to find out what your store view code is. So you just log into your admin. Just log into your admin, and then you'll see under Manage Stores, under the System tab, you can see that I have 3 different store views. I'm interested in the French store view, because that will show me the code, which happens, of course, to be French. Literally the string French. So if I want to specify something different for the French store in the admin, or I'm sorry, in the config XML, I need a stores node. And in there, I'll need a node with the actual store code, French. And then I can just copy in that same XPath. And I will change this. If I knew French, I would write this in French, but I don't. So this will just serve to show you that it is, in fact, working. Now, this, again, isn't very practical, because if the store code were ever changed, then this configuration would no longer work. But this is just a demonstration of what's actually happening in the DOM structure with the default node. Because for each of those stores, aka store views, stores in Magento, this stores node exists, and anything that's specified under default, it's copied basically under each stores node. So if we were to look at the configuration, the DOM structure, we would see stores French, stores German, and stores default. And the reason it would be default is because in this install, the English store actually has a store code of default. So what we're going to do, though, is we're going to override what is automatically put there based on the default node. So I just need to switch store views, and I can do that just by going to 404 page. And now I am, let's see, I will choose the French store. And if I go back, I should see something different. Voila. Here is a French value. So that's how that works. Now, our next task, were there any questions on that? No? Okay, so everyone's got this working. Yeah? Okay. Very good. So now we have to, let's see, set different values for different stores to your option, get all values of your option in the controller. Now, the other thing really to show you is another command here. And let's see. Let's do this. Let's use get config. And get node. Now, I'll pass the same string in here, some random XPath, but I don't want to echo it here. I'm going to var dump. Let's see. So Mage get config, that gets the config object. That's Mage core model config. And then we run just get node. Now the interesting thing here, and Magento uses this all over the place, but what this does is this gives us an object. So if we go back to our page here, I don't have that XPath. Oh, why don't I have that XPath? Because when you're using get node, you actually have to specify the full XPath, basically starting inside that config root node. So default. Once I have that default in there, I get Mage core model config element. So basically the config object contains these elements. It gets you this piece of the config DOM structure, and it's always the return value of this is always an object, so that you can you can cast this to a string if you want, or do something else with the value. You could. The point is you can access the configuration from there below, and that's actually what the config model does all the time. So, if there are no questions, that is the end of the lesson.